Okay, let us now go to our message today. A message I am sharing with you is from the book of Daniel. We started our morning devotion from the book of Daniel last week, and it has become a very wonderful experience. From those devotions, a few things that God has been speaking to me through the book of Daniel, I want to share with you. And one of them is God is absolutely in control of everything. God controls everything. Technical word is God is sovereign. Now, God controls everything. God is sovereign. God is all powerful. Those are wonderful terms, but they have to become our everyday experiences. For that case, I said, if we put our trust in the sovereignty of God, then we are able to make sense of a life in this ever-changing world. The world is changing every single day. Who would have imagined Afghanistan will be going through such a nightmare about a month ago also? Of course, some experts must have realized it, but the Afghanis, someone was interviewing young people, and the young people were telling, we don't want to go back into the 19th century. For 20 long years, the Americans and the Europeans gave them the opportunity to better their future, to better their life, to take advantage of their situation. But all they did was resist the Western influence in the name of Christianity, resist the great devil. And now, when the great devil suddenly left them, and a greater devil has come upon them, and now they are telling, we want to enjoy life in the 21st century. We don't want to go back into the 19th century. It's too late now. World can change at any time, any moment. This morning when I turned on my Facebook, opened my Facebook, and there was a picture of a friend, a pastor friend that I knew very well. He just passed away last night, suddenly. So life can turn upside down, change at any time our circumstances. In this changing world, in this unstable world, in this miserable world full of suffering, what gives us that inner ability to make sense? What makes us not to lose hope? What makes us not to become desperate and cynical and stop enjoying life? And I said, faith in God's sovereignty helps us to keep our sanity, helps us to keep our composure even in the darkest moment. No matter what kind of change comes in your life, if you know there is a God who controls everything, and then if you put your trust in that God, you will be able to face all kind of challenges. That we will see lessons from life of Daniel and his friend. Let me first read the background story in Daniel chapter 1 verse 1 to 4. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim king of Judah into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. 606 BC, Babylonian emperor captures Jerusalem. He didn't destroy the country. He took important things out of the temple and then took very talented, gifted young people captive to Babylon, slaves. Prior to that, prophets had warned Babylon is coming, and submit to him, and he will not destroy you. Listen to the king of Babylon, and he will help you. That's what Jeremiah was telling. But there were false prophets who said, no, you have to fight against Babylon. You go and ask help from Egypt, and you fight, and the temple of God is in Jerusalem. No king can destroy the temple of God. That was what the false prophets were telling. But in reality, they were not worshipping God. They were simply fooling the people. To prove that point of Jeremiah, God allowed the king of Babylon to take all the important utensils from the temple of God in Jerusalem and place them in a pagan temple in Babylonia. That was first disgrace. And then he took all these princely young men and all young women to Babylon as slaves to serve in king's palace. And look at the qualities of these young people. What kind of life they would have had if the Babylonian king did not capture them, didn't destroy their future. Just like the Afghan young people were telling, we are terrified about Taliban's conquer. We don't want to go back into the 19th century. We want to enjoy a life that 21st century is offering. Here, these people, they were like, verse 3, royal family. They were from the royal family. Some of them were prince, some from nobility, the high-ranking officials, children, young men without any physical defect, very good-looking, handsome, beautiful, aptitude for every kind of learning, very intelligent, good-looking, intelligent, no defect in the body, and royal descent, nobility. They had everything lined up for their beautiful future, but suddenly things turn into a nightmare. So they had an ideal life before them, but that ideal life has now turned into a nightmare. They are taken like slaves to Babylon, and they have lost their country, they have lost their family, they have lost their freedom, and chances are they might lose their lives as well. But the lessons from the life of Daniel. Daniel is one of these young men, and his friends' names are listed here. And then they go to Babylon, and king begins to train them. Says, I want to give them a new training now. Not only did they lose their country, not only did they lose their family, their future, their inheritance, now they are about to lose their faith, and they are learning their understanding of the Torah. These are Jewish young men who knew Torah so very well. The king of Babylon says, I want to teach them our literature, our language, our philosophy. And they had to make a choice now whether to continue to believe their faith that was handed down to them by their ancestors, or now will they be influenced by the Babylonian philosophy, Babylonian thinking, Babylonian literature. Let us read from verse 8. They had a dilemma now to abandon their faith in the sovereignty of God. Oh, God has abandoned us. God has abandoned Israel. God has abandoned Jerusalem. God has abandoned temple. God has even allowed the temple utensils to be taken and placed in the heathen temple. The king is deposed and the princes are captured. What is the use of putting our faith in this God? Did they say that? Or how did they say? Let us read chapter 1, verse 8 to 11. 8 and 10. This. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. And the story continues. The royal guard says, no, I cannot grant your decision, your will. If I do that and king is not happy, then he will chop off my head. I can't do that. And the next verse says, God gave favor to Daniel and his friend in the sight of this official, and he allowed them to maintain their religious purity, or you can say their spiritual purity. The Babylonian food definitely included pork. For a Jew, eating pork is anathema. It is going against God, because the law of Moses strongly forbade them to do so. They had to make a choice. Now for us, those who are coming from a pork eating culture, it looks like a very trivial thing. But for a Jew and for a Muslim, it is not a travail at all. It is heaven and earth for them. To able to go and eat pig is equal to saying, I don't want to worship this God, I want to worship an idol. And plus, every meat, whether pig or not, every meat in Babylonia possibly was offered to different gods before they killed the animal. So it's a temple sacrificed food. So, and then wine and all other things. Daniel and his friend decided to maintain their faith in the sovereignty of God in the midst of a nightmare. Daniel and his friend must be so familiar with the story of Joseph. Very similarly, Joseph was captured and taken to Egypt as a slave. He was sold and in a house of a master. The master's wife wanted to defile his spirituality by tempting him into adultery, immorality. It said Daniel ran away from that house naked because he had taken the cloth from his body. And because of that, he suffered long prison sentence. For many years he was in prison. Innocent man, but he went to prison because he wanted to maintain his faith in the sovereignty of God. Yes, I may be punished by a human master, but I have a divine master who knows how to take care of me. So Daniel and his friends are fully aware of this divine hand of God, that if they keep their trust in God's sovereignty in the worst of time, God has the ability to turn that worst of time into the best of times also. That is why my title was, if you put your faith in the sovereignty of God, you will be able to face any challenges in life, no matter what happens. The way Daniel and his friend refused to defile themselves can be a picture of a person who does not want to blame others, or he doesn't want to blame the king or the situation. Rather, they say, we will take responsibility of maintaining our purity. We don't want to take responsibility of blaming. We don't want to make the king responsible for our nightmare. We don't want to make the Judean king responsible for our nightmare. We don't want to make the political situation as an excuse for our nightmare. No matter what happens, outside world, let it be as it is, but I want to take care of my inside world. The next point I wanted to share with you is that when you face tragedies in life, you and I may not be able to change the outside situation, but you and I are completely in control of our inside. You can choose what kind of a person you want to become in any given situation. But sadly, many a time, we don't want to change, but we want others to change. We don't think about ourselves, but we want to think about the external situation. When things go bad, we look for excuses and scapegoats, and rarely or hardly we see into our own heart and into our own mind and say, maybe I have also contributed something for the things that are happening to me. Daniel and his friend, they took care of their inner life, and they took care of their trust in divine hand of God. Even the guard says, if I give you this permission to not to eat the royal food, and he said, give me only vegetables. I don't want to eat the royal food, give me only vegetable. And the guard says, if I give you only the vegetables and you refuse to eat the royal food, and when king's knowledge or king knows about it, he will kill me. So if the guard would be killed, what would have happened to the people who refused king's order? They were willing to die. They risked their life in the sovereignty of God. This is the story throughout the book of Daniel. And the lesson for us is that we must never put our trust in our government, in our rulers, or in our privilege as prince or princess, our noble birth, or our money, our prestige, our power, our job. Never put our trust in anything other than the sovereign hand of God. That is a mark of a believer who truly knows God. Don't put your trust in your money. It can go out of your life at any time. Don't put your trust in your own physical well-being. This health can also give up at any time. Anywhere else, if you put your trust, it will disappoint you. But if you put your trust in the sovereign hand of God, and you are willing, the trust in God has to be evidenced by your willingness to sacrifice. Now, many a time we say, I believe in God, I believe in God, as long as things go according to my way. But when things begin to go against my ways, our faith begins to waver. And we become bitter, we start question, we become skeptical, cynical, and we refuse to see our role in bringing misery to us. And we always look for scapegoat or blaming others. So when I say I believe in God, I must be willing to back up my claim with my willingness to sacrifice for my belief. So Daniel and his friends were willing to die, and they say, let us only eat vegetables and fruits, because we don't want to defile ourselves. We are people of God. We trust in God. And then the guard says, how can you become healthy? You have to be trained for 3 long years. You have to study. You have to do work hard. And study is not an easy job. Intellectual activity is very tasking. It requires physical and mental and emotional stamina. So the guard was right in thinking. But Daniel said, try us, test us. And they test for 10 days. And for the next 3 years, Daniel and his friend, they eat only the green vegetables. Other people are eating royal food. They have a banquet before them. But these people are simply waiting for the grass. At the end of their training, 3 long years of training, the Bible goes on to say, they were found 10 times wiser, smarter, intelligent than the rest of the Babylonian wise young men. 10 times. Geniuses. The result of trusting in the sovereign hand of God is that you and I will never lose. We may have to die, but that's a gain. That's when Paul says, for me to die is gain, to live is Christ. In other words, if we have to die now, it's amazing. We have an amazing eternal life free from the effect of sin, free from suffering and sorrow and misery. That's a gain. But to live is Christ. In other, if I'm living here, I'm living to present Jesus Christ. It's a challenge. It's a suffering. Sacrifices are involved. If you are a Christian, you will suffer. If you're a believer, you will face challenges in life. But the problem is not only Christian, but all other people are also facing challenges. But the challenge for the Christian is to maintain our purity of the heart, to maintain our trust in the sovereign hand of God. That's the difference. Every human being that is born on the face of this earth will go through suffering. Whether he is Elon Musk or Bill Gates or whatever Gate, or some pauper or a farmer or beggar or homeless person. Every human being will face suffering. But will we be able to maintain our inner purity and our unwavering trust in the goodness of God, in the sovereign hand of God? That is the challenge. And if we can maintain that inner sanity, inner purity, that inner trust, inner resolve, knowing that whatever is happening to me is not outside the plan of God. God is behind all that is happening to me. If you can maintain that, you will see the effect of that sovereign hand of God working on your behalf. Let us go and see in chapter 2, verse 17 onward, how Daniel and his friend experienced the sovereign hand of God. The king in Babylon had a terrible dream, and that dream terrified him. He couldn't sleep, looked for anyone who could interpret, couldn't find. And then king was so mad, he said, I'm going to destroy all these wise men who claim to have this mysterious knowledge, ability to read palms. In Hindu culture, this is not a new thing. You go to a temple, you go to a street, there are many people, shamanist or palm reader, horoscope and everything. They can tell all about you. I don't know if you have tried before you came to Christ. So this king was so mad, and he said, I'm going to find out all these wise men and I'm going to destroy them, since they cannot tell me my dream and the meaning of that dream. Daniel happened to hear that. Otherwise, Daniel and his friend are also among the wise men, and they would be killed. Another tragedy comes to these Hebrew young men in Babylon. And then Daniel somehow manages to get an audience with the king and said, Oh king, if you give me a chance, I will interpret your dream. And then he goes home. Verse 17, chapter 2. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. That was the verdict. King said, destroy all these wise men of Babylon, including Daniel and all his friends. And Daniel is not only now interceding to God, asking his friend to pray to God for their own life, for the rest of the Babylonian men who might be the target for this killing. Verse 19. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven, and he said, Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and season. Look at Daniel is a young man. He's not an old wise man talking here. Most likely about 20 or something at this time. He said, He changes times and season. God is sovereign. He deposes kings and raises up others. It is God who decides who will rule and who will be dethroned. Enthroned and dethroned belong to God. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. Look at that. It's a beautiful phrase here. He gives wisdom to the wise. The one who has will be given more. The one who does not have, whatever he has also will be taken away from him. That is a spiritual principle Jesus laid out. And here Daniel is also telling God, you are sovereign, you're amazing. You're so kind and compassionate that if you want to learn something, if you want to be a wise man, God is going to give you wisdom. If you have, he says, discerning, he gives knowledge to the discerning. If you have a good heart, in some translation, if your conscience is right, a pure conscience, he's going to give you more purity. If you are looking for good in life, God is going to give you more good. That's the point here. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Daniel's prayer, Daniel's friend's prayer were answered by this amazing sovereign God. Now, when we believe God is all powerful, almighty and sovereign, that almighty, powerful, sovereign God has to become so small and limited and able to communicate to us. And that is exactly what Daniel, God, you are awesome, you are mighty. But now you have heard the prayers of these young, helpless Hebrew boys. And he began to worship God. That's what you will do when you put your trust in the sovereign God. In spite of the challenges of life, if you are willing to sacrifice your life to maintain your faith in the sovereign hand of God, God will perform wondrous work in your life. When you see the work of God coming in your life, when you see the evidence of the work of God's grace working in your life, you will lift up your voice and say, praise God, you are amazing, you are wonderful. The thing is, many a time we cannot enjoy the sovereign work of God in our life because we haven't really trusted in His sovereignty. We trust Him so far as it is convenience. The moment it becomes difficult, the moment it requires sacrifices, the moment we have to do something, the moment it is a bit uncomfortable, our trust in God shifts away to human cunningness, human cleverness, human survival instinct kick in us, and we want to make our own way. If it is like Daniel, his ideal life was torn apart and he was taken to Babylon as a captive. So the normal human response would be, wow, now I am in Babylon, now I have been offered a royal palace and food of the kings, I will take advantage of, I'll be the best person in the Babylonia. And I will take whatever is offered to me. I don't care. My faith, I will just put it aside now. I'll be a best Babylonian. That's what the survival instinct is an enemy of faith in God. That is what the Bible calls the flesh is always warring against the spirit. Daniel put his trust in God at a crucial point where if things went wrong, he could have lost his life, and he was perfectly happy to do so. How do we know that? We see later in life in Daniel, he was willing to lay down his life at any time for the sovereign God. There was not a shadow of doubt in his faith in the sovereign hand of God. And one time he was thrown in lion's den, and the king who threw him in the lion's den was so sad and mad against the people who conspired these things. And the amazing thing, the early in the morning, king goes to the lion's den and says, oh, Daniel, he's screaming out, has your God saved you? And then Daniel coolly replies from the lion's den, oh, my king, I was found innocent in your sight and also in the sight of my God. And because of that, God sent angels to shut the mouth of the lions. So the point is, my brothers and sisters, we may not be in a very terrible, nightmarish situation like the people of Afghanistan, but we never know when things will turn around. What gives us the inner strength to go on? Our trust in the sovereign hand of God and the sovereign goodness of God. That ultimately, my God is in control. No matter what happens, I put my trust. How do I put my trust? By willing to sacrifice my life. And humbling this Daniel and his friend, they humble themselves, said, God, unless you do this, we are done. Save these Babylonians, save us also. And God answers. And when God answered their prayer, The first response was to praise God, to worship God, to give Him the glory. And eventually in verse 48 and 49 of chapter 2, Daniel becomes the most powerful person in the empire next to the king. And 3 of his friends also become very, very powerful figures. So will you be willing to risk your life to put your trust in this amazing God? If you do so, you will never know what God can do out of your life. You will never know how far God will take you up in your life. That's what the Bible says. Everything is possible for him who believes. Faith in the sovereign hand of God will always take you to a higher place in life. You will never be let down, no matter who the enemy is, no matter who is trying to destroy your life, no matter what is trying to destroy your life. Faith in the sovereign hand of God and your dedication and willingness to lay down your life will always result in you having a greater amount of life. Jesus said, if anyone comes after me, let him deny. And the other place he said, anyone who gives his life for my sake will find his life, but anyone who tried to save his life and rejects me will lose his life. Let me close here today, and we will go into prayer. And my main encouragement for you today is keep trusting God no matter how difficult and dark the times may come in your life. And if you keep trusting God during the dark nights, this sovereign, mighty, powerful God will bring a beautiful, bright morning in your life. Amen. Let's now, I hope Susan will have discontinued.